it sounds like no Kate, so I'll quickly introduce her. Kate Marianchild is a local author. Her book, The Secrets of the Oak Woodlands, was published in 2014 and is a absolutely lovely introduction to the inhabitants of the Oak Woodlands around us. So if you haven't read it, it's a great read. She began her passionate love affair with the Oak Woodlands of Northern California by moving into a one-room yurt outside of Ukiah in the Oak Woodlands, and has lived there ever since for almost 20 years now. Tonight, she is going to be helping us learn a bit more about our neighbors. So Kate, I'm going to pass it off to you.
All right. So thank you, Jen. That was a nice introduction, and hello, everybody. Thank you for coming. Before I start my talk, I just want you to know, in case you might have to leave early, that we are recording this talk, but we're not yet sure where it'll be posted. So if you want to be notified about where you can find that video or about future events that I do, please contact me through my website, katemarianchild.com, all one word. And I can tell you now that I will be giving this talk again on January 27th at 7:30 p.m. for East Bay, California Native Plant Society. And on my website, you can also purchase signed copies of my book or my oak identification guides that you will see during this presentation tonight, and close focusing binoculars. And I also have a page on my website about how to restore butterfly, moth, and other insect and bird populations. But to find those, you can't find the oak guides or the birds and butterflies, etc., on the homepage. You have to go to any other page, and then on the left, you can find the link to those.
For you, when you saw.
Sounds like you have to mute people again, Jen. Now, can you still hear me now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So today I'm going to give you tips for identifying the tree oaks of Northern and Southern California, and I'll also throw in some little known oak lore. With fires and human development pressures and climate change, oaks need all the friends they can get right now, and recognition is the first step in friendship, whether you're making friends with humans or with lizards or with trees. So why are oaks important? There are many reasons. They sequester tremendous amounts of carbon, they retain groundwater, they improve water quality, they improve and enrich soil, they are beautiful. But the reason that I'm going to emphasize today, whoops, how come that didn't work, is their tremendous biological productivity. More species and greater numbers of individual organisms live in oak woodlands than in any other terrestrial ecosystem in California. That's partly because oaks produce tremendous numbers of nutrient-rich seeds, acorns, each fall. And these seeds are packaged in sealed containers that preserve the nuts inside for months or even years. And they become food for animals, from insects to rodents to birds, bears, and humans. Here's evidence of non-human acorn consumption. Here we have acorns with little tiny holes in it, which is where the larvae of weevils have exited the acorn shells. Here we have a couple of acorns that were nibbled by deer mice so that they could get to the nut inside. I found these in a deer mouse nest. And here we have the shells left by acorn woodpeckers. And as for humans, this is a photo of Corinne Pierce, who is an amazing pomo educator and basket weaver who lives in Redwood Valley. And she teaches people how to process, here she's teaching people how to practice black oak acorn in the upper left. She and her family, along with many other families in my area and in all of California, both native and non-native, process and eat acorn every year. It's not just something of the past. Here's a native woman from an earlier time pounding acorn on a grinding rock. The acorn consuming cultures of California were probably the last in the world to rely primarily on acorn as their staple food into the modern age. An average family in the past consumed about 1,000 pounds of acorn per year, and they often had twice that amount stored against adversity. And here are some examples of the acorn granaries in which the Tuolumne and Yosemite Miwok people stored acorn. So besides producing acorns, oaks are also important because more than any other plant in North America, their large canopies support enormous numbers of caterpillars. This funny looking caterpillar in the upper left is the larva of the California sister butterfly, who lays her eggs only on oaks. And I have a whole chapter on that butterfly in my book. Her favorite oak is the Canyon live oak, which is the oak in this photo. In spring and summer, caterpillars devour the leaves of oaks, and most of those caterpillars get eaten in turn, becoming the foundation for multiple food webs. And I wonder if you knew that caterpillars turn into birds. Well, how does that work? Caterpillars are the songbird equivalent of mother's milk and Gerber's baby food, the ideal and irreplaceable food needed for most baby songbirds to survive. They're soft and squishy and full of fat and protein and carbohydrates. And when they aren't available, many baby birds starve. So this robin was raised on caterpillars, and now she's collecting them to feed to her own babies. And where does she find caterpillars? Primarily on native plants. That's because most caterpillars have not evolved resistance to the toxins in non-native plants and plants that have been introduced. Most people don't know this, but without caterpillars, we wouldn't hear much bird song every spring. Here we have a western bluebird, a lazuli bunting, and a black-headed grosbeak. So when I was writing my book, I didn't know much about individual oak species. I was primarily fascinated with the plants and animals and lichens and fungi that live among the oaks. But after the book came out in 2014, everybody assumed I was an expert on oaks themselves, how to identify them, how to plant them, how to tend them. So I've had to play catch up. I've learned about planting oaks and protecting volunteer oak seedlings from Lindsay Daly of the Oak Granary, and Carrie Heisey and Pralada Papper looked over the early
You're muted.
Kate, muted yourself, Kate.
Kate, you muted yourself.
Okay, what's the last thing you heard? I don't know how I did that.
You were just starting to talk about this slide.
Okay.
Yep.
So this is a two-sided laminated guide that shows classic acorns and leaves of 8 oak species. And in the bottom row, it shows galls that occur only on particular species. In this case, on this side, it's the white oak section. You can see up here, it says white oaks in the upper right-hand corner. And these galls can help you identify oak trees. This is the other side of the guide with, you can see up here in the upper right, the red and golden oak sections. And I'll talk about what sections are in a minute. So if you have trouble identifying oaks, you are right up there with the experts. You're in excellent company. Everyone has trouble, including me. And that's because oaks sleep around with oaks of other species. In other words, they hybridize. And that changes how they look. So they often look like a little of one and a little of the other. And sometimes you just have to shrug your shoulders and say, Hell if I know. But I'm going to show you some reliable clues that will help. I find that a lot of people have a hard time remembering the characteristics that are helpful for identifying oaks. So I'm going to play with some mnemonic or memory aids today. And toward the end, you'll even get to recite with me some oak identification jingles that I've made up about different species. So the oak genus, Quercus, will you say that with me? It's a word I want you all to end up knowing. Quercus, Quercus. That's the genus that oaks are in. First appears in the fossil record about 50 million years ago, and it becomes well established in California about 20 million years ago. In the beginning, oaks were pollinated by wind, but then for some unknown reason, they decided to try insects. But that apparently didn't work out because then they went back to wind. Now think about it for a minute. Do you know, or a second, do you know when oaks flower? They flower, I'm sorry, I just took a drink of water. They flower in early spring. So maybe that's why they went back to wind, because there aren't many insects around in early spring, but we don't know for sure. There are about 600 species of oaks in the world. This magnificent specimen is in England. And North America is the world center of oak diversity. Mexico helps out with that a lot. It has more oaks than any other country in the world, a whopping 160 species. And the US has about 90. So together that's 250. And that gives North America the lead, but China is right up there with 100 species. And almost all the oaks in the world are in the Northern Hemisphere. There are only a few that dip down into Indonesia. Of the 90 in the US, California has a respectable 22 species, and quite a few of them are endemic to California, which means they occur nowhere else. They're native to nowhere else in the world. And almost all of the oaks we see throughout California have been planted by one bird species. A few have been planted by some others, but do you know what bird you're going to see in the next slide?
California jay.
It is the California scrub jay, who has co-evolved with oaks. Scrub jays eat the seeds of oaks, the acorns, and which means they're considered seed predators, but they also plant the following generations of oak seedlings. And each of these birds stores up to 5,000 acorns in the ground each fall in ideal spots for germination. But then they leave about up to a third of them in the ground uneaten. And sometimes the jays are in a hurry and they carry 2 acorns at a time. This is an illustration that's in the book painted by Anne McGlinty. And right this very minute, scrub jays are replanting lands that burned, well, not this very minute, not during the night, but these days, scrub jays are replanting lands that burned this year. But jays rely on oaks for something besides acorns. Guess what? Caterpillars. Like robins, they feed mainly caterpillars to their babies, who will then grow up to be planters of oaks. So this is a really beautiful symbiosis between a tree genus and a bird species. Now, I know that some of you don't know an oak from a buckeye, from a maple, so it should help you to know that oaks are the only trees in North America that produce acorns that have these, where the nut itself, or the shell of the nut is, the nut is nestled into these caps, or also known as cups or cupules. So if you find those beneath a tree, it's probably an oak, unless it got planted there by a jay or ended up there by some other way. And so, by the way, immature acorns are green, like this one, and then they turn brown. This is a different species. And sometimes some species of acorns turn this beautiful, dark, almost black as they age. So I collected all of these acorns on the left this fall in Mendocino County. Well, actually all the acorns on this page. The ones on the left are acorns of oaks that are in the genus Quercus, and they're considered the true oaks. And the acorns on the right are from tan oaks in the genus Notholithocarpus. So here is a tan oak acorn up close. And what I'd like you to do now is look at the acorns that you brought with you and see if you have one with a bristly cap like this. If so, write tan oak on a piece of paper and set your acorn on that piece of paper. And I'll just wait a minute and take a drink while you write that down. Okay, these are the only acorns with bristly caps that we have anyway here in California. And my mnemonic aid for them is that tan oak acorns are bristling with indignation at not being considered true oaks. It's one of those DNA things, you know. And according to my friend, Dr. Sherry Smith Ferry, who I think is here tonight, who is a member of the Dry Creek Band of Pomo Indians, tan oak acorns are almost always the preferred acorns of Native Californians who live close enough to them to harvest them easily. She told me that people like tan oak acorns because they're easy acorn because it's easier to prepare and it tastes better and it has lower amounts of oil than, say, black oak acorn, which is the other favorite of most of the Pomo peoples in whose homeland I live, which is, I'm here in the greater Ukiah Valley area. So notice how hairy the nut part of this acorn is. That is typical of tan oak acorns, unless the hairs have worn off with age or being rubbed by humans. And tan oak leaves are also covered with fine hairs, unless the hairs have worn off. My thumb made that part right there more smooth. So tan oaks are important for humans, and they're also extremely important for wildlife. And one reason for that is that their acorn crops are more reliable than those of the other oaks. And that could be because, unlike oaks in the Quercus genus, tan oak flowers are pollinated by both wind and insects. So now please pick up another one of the acorns you brought with you and close your eyes. And if the cap is not connected to the acorn, hold just the cap. The acorn isn't important right now. And if you have more than one acorn, keep track of which acorn goes with which cap, because at this time of year, the caps have usually fallen off. So roll the cap around in your fingers, feeling its texture on the outside. Then see if it has any scales that you can get a fingernail under. And do this gently because I don't want you to get any scales jammed up under your fingernail too far. If there's anything that kind of flicks up a little bit when you put your fingernail, try to get it underneath. Or if it's not one of those, feel for hard bumps or warts. We call them warts. And you can kind of drag your fingernail along the cup and it should go up over some bumps and then kind of down into some really little crevices and then up again. On some caps, the warts are really small and maybe a little bit hard to distinguish. Or notice if the cap feels kind of soft and velvety. and maybe a little bit, maybe has a little bit of give to it. And maybe if you hold it between your thumb and your forefinger, it has a kind of a thick wall. So what we're trying to do is figure out which evolutionary group of oaks your acorn came from. And these evolutionary groups are officially called sections now. That's kind of new. And that's what I was talking about earlier when I mentioned sections. And in California, we have 3 sections. Their unofficial, non-scientific names are red oaks, white oaks, and golden oaks. And I have the scientific names on my guides. And the reason we're focusing on acorns, and if you want to open your eyes now, you can, or you can keep feeling things. You could even kiss your acorn caps if you want to. The reason we're focusing on acorns is that they are part of the reproductive apparatus of the tree, and the reproductive parts are the slowest to change when species hybridize, cross with each other. And of the reproductive parts, the caps are the most reliable identifiers of all, which means they change the most slowly. So here's a little jingle that I made up about that. Leaves change all over the map, while nuts and caps are taking a nap. So oaks species, lines, but they don't share their pollen. They don't, quote, sleep around with just any old oak. They can be fertilized only by the pollen of oaks from the same section. So a red oak can pollinate another red oak, and those are groups of oaks. It's not just one species, but it can't pollinate an oak that's in the golden oak group or the white oak group. So if you haven't opened your eyes, open them now and see if your cap looks like any of the caps in this photo. Oh, so these are in the white oak section. I noticed that when I changed the color of the background, you can very faintly see white oak section in the lower left. So these caps have modified scales called tubercles or warts, as I said before. And those are typical of oaks in the white oak section. If your acorn cap, let's see. So if the cup or cap looks like one of these, it's in the red oak section. And these are the ones that I was thinking you could maybe get your thumbnail under those scales. So if you have one or more of these, write red oak section on a piece of paper and set your acorn and cap on that piece of paper. And I'll wait a minute while you do that. So now I've talked about the white oak section and the red oak section, and let's review with some mnemonic aids. A memory aid for the white oak section is W is for whites, and whites have warts. Or we could just say whites have warts. So say that with me if you want, as a, adding another, sense to, besides hearing and visuals, to your learning process. And it actually helps to add a feeling when you're trying to learn something. So you could say, whites have warts, or whites have warts, or you could even sing it if you wanted. So try saying it with some feeling with me right now. Whites have warts. And take a good look at those warty caps as you're doing that. Okay, so galls are another way to identify an oak section. And that's G-A-L-L-S. I don't know if you're all familiar with what galls are. You've maybe seen these. They look kind of like baked potatoes when they're old, and when they're young, they're green. This one looks kind of like a green tomato, actually. But these are called oak apple galls, and they occur only on oaks in the white oak section. And they're pretty big and easy to see. So if you can be standing a long distance from a tree, and if you see those galls on that tree, you know that it's in the white oak section. And there is a fun chapter in my book on galls, but I don't have time to go into this amazing phenomenon right now. But I'll just say that a gall is produced by a tree when it receives orders in the form of chemical signals from tiny harmless wasps the size of fruit flies. And each wasp species, there are many, many species of wasps that lay eggs on oaks. And each wasp species lays eggs only on the oaks of one of those three sections, the red oaks, the golden oaks, or the white oaks. So now I'm going to throw down a gauntlet for you. If wasps with brains no bigger than fruit fly brains can tell what section an oak is in, so can you. There are many more species of gall wasps, and the galls of each looks different from the gall of each looks different from the gall of any other species of wasp. So these are just a small number of the galls that are in the white oak section. And many of them are colorful like these, and many of these are smaller than the tip of your little finger. So you really have to look for them. For me, it's like a treasure hunt. So just know that if you see any of these galls, you'll know for sure that you're in the white oak section. And if you want to see more, go to joycegrossphotography.com. I just put in Joyce Gross Photography, galls in a Google search field, and I go right there. And now, okay, so that's galls. Now on to a mnemonic aid for the red oak section. R is for red oaks, and reds have roofing shingles. That's because all red oaks have scales that overlap each other like roofing shingles. And the red oak caps can also be kind of rough. So we can also say R is for rough. They're kind of rough and scratchy sometimes, not always. So we have now discussed the white oak and the red oak sections. And now I want to see if you have an acorn that looks like one of these. These acorns are from Canyon live oak, and that is the only tree size oak in Northern California that's in the golden oak section. It's also known as the intermediate oak section. So I'm not going to give you tips for identifying the golden oak section because that's kind of tricky, but I'm going to help you identify this particular tree, Canyon live oak. A lot of people aren't even aware of its existence. They can get to be really, really huge. So I'm going to spend a little extra time on this since a lot of people aren't familiar with it. Check out these acorns. The cups are often wide with thick walls like these in this photo. And they often have a kind of cork-like quality with a little bit of give and a soft velvety surface. So if you have one of these, something that looks like this, let me finish with that part though, because, and so they're velvety because they have a fine gold down that covers them, although it kind of wears off with age. Or they can be wide caps, but woolly, like this one. I've seen one of these only once up in the Sierras. But these acorns mature in their second year. So if you're looking at one of this year's acorns, the corkiness or thickness might not be as evident. So I collected these 2 acorns on September 23rd, and you can see that these caps aren't as wide yet as they will be. And I don't live with this tree, so I don't even know how long these acorns stay green. But if you remove the cap, so if you see one of these, you could be kind of confused about what it is. But if you remove the cap and look at it from the underside, this is Canyon live oak, and this is a cap of an acorn in the white oak section. And see how these walls are thickening and kind of also curving in. So if you have an acorn that looks like, or a cap that looks like any of the ones you've just seen, write Canyon live oak on a piece of paper. Okay, so I've told you all about their caps, but I actually usually first recognize a Canyon live oak by its leaves, which are quite distinctive because they are so leathery and flat, and they don't have any lobes at all. And they come to this kind of acute point. So I have been faked out before. So the best thing to look for is look on the backs of the leaves. See how these are gold? That's because of fine gold hairs, like the ones that also exist on the surface of the caps. That's why it's called the golden oak section. And the thing is, though, that the gold wears off, the fine fuzz wears off. So you have to turn over a number of leaves, and especially look for young ones to determine if the tree you're looking at is a Canyon live oak. So here's an image of leaves and acorns together. And these acorns are still green, but much, much bigger with wider and thicker cups than the ones I just showed you, and the ones that I photographed in September. So now look at the edges or the margins of these leaves, which are also from Canyon live oak. They look very different. Why do they have all these spines? They look very different from these leaves. But these are both from Canyon live oak. I don't know why the ones on the left look so blue. I think it was just a trick of light. So again, why do these have spine tips, these on the left, while these do not? Well, I'm so glad that someone asked that question. I was hoping for that question. And now this is an opportunity for some really cool oak lore. Deer and elk and caterpillars and wood rats all love to eat oak leaves. So oaks have evolved coping strategies. And for this, when deer and elk browse the leaves of oaks pretty heavily, when a certain percentage of the lower leaves get eaten, oaks secrete a hormone that causes the lower part of the tree, the browsable part of the tree, to grow these spine tips. And what they actually are is they're extensions of the leaf veins. The same phenomenon happens with coast live oak and interior live oak, and sometimes even blue oak. And it's very puzzling to people to see leaves that look like this on the lower part of the tree and leaves with very smooth margins like these on the upper part of the tree. But the tree has a different strategy when caterpillars eat its leaves. Instead of discouraging the caterpillars by secreting toxic chemicals in its leaves, for instance, it actually seems to encourage them. It has evolved the strategy of having a second set of leaf buds right in here, just lying in wait in case they're needed. And when a tree loses a certain percentage of its canopy to caterpillars, it secretes a hormone that causes that second set of leaves to unfurl. And if too many of those leaves get eaten, there's a third set of leaf buds lying in wait. So the tree seems to have evolved a strategy for handling caterpillars and leaf damage without having to discourage the caterpillars. And it's so effective that an oak can get completely denuded by caterpillars and still recover. It's been happening down in the Santa Rosa Laguna, the Laguna Santa Rosa, I hear. So instead of worrying about leaf damage like that on the left here, which a lot of people do, instead of spraying with pesticides, for instance, we should be celebrating leaf damage. In these days of plummeting insect populations, we should be saying, ooh, look at that leaf damage. That tree has caterpillars. That means we'll have butterflies and birdsong next spring. So I hate to say it, but we have to start gardening for caterpillars, which means planting native plants, as I said earlier. And because there are about 20 to 30 times more moths than butterflies, we have to actually garden for moths. Both butterflies and moths have caterpillars as a larval stage. I mean, as a, what's the word? A development stage. And let's also think about turning our cities and towns into caterpillar paradises by planting native plants. Okay, that was a diversion back to identifying oaks. So now we're going to go to the red oak side of my oak guide, where we find black oak, interior live oak, and coast live oak in the red oak section, and canyon live oak in the golden oak section. Now we've just graduated from identifying oaks by section to moving to the species level. But if you come away from this talk with nothing but what you've learned so far about sections and about canyon live oak, which is a species, you'll have a good start. And you could stop listening now if you wanted to, but I hope you'll continue. So my goal for the rest of this talk is to give you tips about Valley, Blue, and Oregon oak. But first, I'm just going to give you a few tips for the red oaks. Black oak over here is confusingly a red oak. And it is the only California oak whose leaves have long, fine, and somewhat flexible bristle tips at the end of the lobes. So this is a 100% reliable clue, except that you have to make sure that you're looking at an oak, because for instance, big leaf maple leaves also have bristle tips. So you have to make sure that there's an acorn associated with this tree. So to help remember this, you could say, black oaks have bristle tips. Black oaks have bristle tips. The acorns of black oaks are pretty unmistakable. They have deep cups. The acorns sit deep in the cup and often extend halfway up the nut or even more. And of course, they have overlapping scales in the roofing shingle style of all red oaks. And now I'm going to give you a couple tips for identifying coast live oak, which is also in the red oak section. It's right here. And mature coast live oaks are really magical. They often have beautiful, curvy, twisty, sinuous trunks and limbs. And when you're in a coast live oak forest, at least before sudden oak death, you'd be expecting fairies to peer out from behind the trunks or hollows or branches. And a tip for the truly dedicated for identifying coast live oak is that many of the leaves have what we call hairy armpits on the underside. So can you see the hairy armpits? There are two hairy armpits on this leaf, and they're not down here where you may have looked. They're right here. Here's one and here's another. And there's a little remnant of one right there. They're very inconspicuous little bits of fuzz where a lateral vein, this is a lateral vein, meets a mid vein. So now what I want you to do is fold your arms and put both hands into your armpits. And while you're at it, give yourself a really nice squeeze. And send that squeeze out to everybody you know, including, and send it to me too, even if you don't know me, and I'm sending my hug to you. And while you're squeezing yourself and feeling all cozy, say with me, and it's now on the screen, coast live oaks are just like me, with hairy armpits, hard to see. Let's say that again. Coast live oaks are just like me, with hairy armpits, hard to see. When you're looking for hairy armpits, you may have to turn over 10 or 20 leaves before you find one. But all you have to find is one. And close focus binoculars are very helpful, though you can often see the fuzz with just your naked eye. And just remember that here they're extremely magnified. Another clue for coast live oak, and this isn't in my guide yet because I just learned it the other day from Carrie Heisey, is that there are always fewer than 6 pairs of lateral veins on the leaves. And the other red oaks have many more. I was astonished when I went out and looked at interior live oak leaves and saw how many they have. So now I'm going to flip the guide over, and now we're on the white oak side. And we have 3 deciduous white oaks, valley oak, Oregon oak, and blue oak, and 1 evergreen white oak, California scrub oak, which I'm not going to get to today. I'm going to start with valley oak, Quercus lobata. Though valley oaks do grow in hills, they love floodplains. So like Ukiah Valley, where I live, is a former floodplain. And a lot of Santa Rosa is a floodplain. And floodplains are usually in valleys. I guess they're probably always in valleys. And that's why this tree is called valley oak. Valley oaks used to grow in riparian corridors that were 5 miles wide on each side of the rivers that came out of the Sierra foothills. And in fact, it is said that you used to be able to walk the entire length of the Central Valley without ever leaving the shade of a valley oak. But they do also grow on hills and ridges, and there they send sinker roots as far as 80 feet down to find standing water, because they really need water, winter water particularly. So here is a valley oak acorn. The cup has large warts, and the nut is seated pretty deeply in the cup, and the nuts are very large. When they're mature, they are the longest in California, the longest acorns in California, sometimes 3 times longer than they are wide. And if you turn the acorn over, its shape is roughly like that of a V. So V is for very long, very V-shaped valley oak acorn. Try saying that with me. Very long V-shaped valley oak acorn. And now for the valley oak leaf, which is one of the most challenging aspects of identifying oaks because it looks a lot like the Oregon oak leaf. So these parts that stick out, I call them the hills, are called lobes. And these indentations are called sinuses. And for valley oak, you could also think of them as valleys. On classic valley oak leaves, the lobes are softly rounded, like this one and this one and this one. And at least some of the sinuses, not all, but some of the sinuses, the sinuses on some of the leaves, well, yeah, some of the sinuses on some of the leaves will be deep and wide. This is a wide sinus and this is a deep sinus, like these. And some of the sinuses will have sides that are roughly perpendicular to the mid vein rather than diagonal. So if you find even a few leaves with these characteristics, your tree is probably a valley oak. And then if you find the acorn, that really long V-shaped acorn, that will usually settle the matter. And if the edge of the sinus is parallel to the mid vein, like this, that is also pretty diagnostic. And this leaf here, I found it this fall. That's the most parallel and straight edge of a sinus that I have ever seen. It looks like it was cut with scissors. So all of these leaves came off of the same tree at the same time, even these small young leaves. And another clue to valley oak ID is that they're the only oaks that keep producing small young leaves all summer. Another helpful word for valley oak is lacy, because with all those deep wide sinuses, there's a lot of negative space or open space, as with lace. I especially see that on clusters of young leaves. So if you're trying to figure out if a leaf is a valley oak and you're still can't tell if a leaf is from a valley oak or if a tree is a valley oak, and you still can't tell if it's valley oak or Oregon oak, look for these galls right here, which I'll show you in magnified here. These two galls are the convoluted gall. These two galls are the club gall, and both are found only on valley oaks. But they won't be this big when you're looking for them. They'll be 1 inch high. These might be 1/2 inch at the most, and these might be 1/2 inch wide at the most. Your last tip for valley oak is that the trunks and branches often grow into a vase shape. So here is a poem for our final valley oak mnemonic. And you can read this with me. Majestic valley oaks, the tallest of their kind, super long nuts bring a V shape to mind. Their round lobe leaves have the deepest of sinuses. Look in well-watered valleys for these royal highnesses. Partly I call them royal highnesses because many people consider them to be the most majestic trees in North America, and the tallest oaks. They may be the tallest oaks in the world. We have one. We have the tallest oak in the world in Covelo, actually. So valley floor dweller, V-shaped acorn, very long acorn, valley-like sinuses, deep and wide, and vase-like shape to the tree. Okay, now for Oregon oak. I'm not going to spend so much time. It's also called Gary oak, especially by scientists. First of all, lots of people here just call this oak white oak or Oregon white oak. And you can see why. The white oak section gets its name from the whitish bark of white oaks. And Oregon white oak might have the whitest of the white oak bark. So people call them white oaks, but because there's a whole white oak section with several species, it's clearer to your listener if you say Oregon oak or Oregon white oak or Gary oak, but not just white oak. Or you can say the scientific name, which is Quercus garryana. The typical Oregon oak leaf has shallower and more diagonal sinuses like this and this and this. These ones are fairly deep, but often they're not this deep than valley oak leaves do. And the lobes have these pointy tips. They're called acute tips, rather than those softly rounded tips of the valley oaks. So now I'm going to show you a couple of leaves and see if you can tell which is which. One of these is valley oak and one of these is Oregon oak. So cast your vote. I bet you thought balloting was over, but it's not quite. And the answer is, this is Oregon or Gary oak with diagonal sinuses and acute tips. And this is valley oak with deep, wide sinuses. These aren't as deep and wide as those other ones, but they qualify. And these little galls, these are the red cone gall, and that's a bonus. I see them more on valley oaks than on any other tree. Sometimes they're just covered with them. So if you see those, you know at least you're in the white oak section, and there's a good chance you're looking at a valley oak. And I don't know if, back to Oregon oak, I don't know if the Oregon oak acorn can ever be confused with a valley oak acorn because it's more O-shaped than V-shaped. And if you happen, so we're still on how to identify Oregon oak, if you happen to see a speckledy gall like this, about the size of a ping pong ball or smaller, maybe a grape, you can be sure that the tree you're looking at is an Oregon oak. So here are our mnemonics for Oregon oak. O is for Oregon oak with its O-shaped acorn and its sort of O-shaped gall. And here is the poem for Oregon oak. And read this with me. Oregon oak, nut shaped like an O, its cup almost falling off like some plumber's pants, you know. Sinuses diagonal and lobes with tips acute, leaves shiny above and velvet below make Gary oak a beaut. I didn't mention the velvety underside. And finally, we come to blue oak. And this tree is, I took this picture the other day, it's on the land where I live. So with blue oak, hear ye, you shall know blue oaks by their barely lobed, wavy-edged leaves and their bluish cast. So see how blue that is, and see the bluish cast to this, and you'll get to contrast it in a minute. And this is a bonus. I had never seen this gall before. Here it is, whoops, magnified. It's called the plate gall. And these are the mnemonics for blue. Bleu. Bleu is for barely lobed leaves. I was really struggling for this mnemonic, you can see. And bluish cast. And then just a straight B is for a buttery soft matte surface. These leaves aren't shiny and they're quite flexible. But we have a problem because a lot of people mistake blue oak leaves for live oak leaves, in live oaks in the red oak section, because both are unlobed. This one does have tiny lobes, but often the leaf margins are, almost straight or almost even and not wavy, not very wavy. So compare the color of these leaves to these leaves. So these are from live oaks in the red oak section, and these are blue oak leaves. And also notice how shiny these interior live oak leaves are. And last but not least, we have the blue oak acorn, which can be somewhat V-shaped like the valley oak acorns, but they're not nearly as long as valley oak acorns, and the cup doesn't come up as high on the nut. So here we have, these are two blue oak acorns, and this is a valley oak acorn. And these pictures, I took them on the same day. So you can see how much bigger the valley oak acorn is than the blue oak acorn. And the cup is the cup is deeper than these, which are pretty shallow. So we're going to go out with a blue oak poem. And you can read it with me. As summer goes on, blue's leaves become bluer, with surfaces matte and lobes absent to fewer. Acorns don't measure much more than an inch. With small warty caps, the ID's a cinch. So that's all the more we're gonna do tonight. And if you are feeling overwhelmed, I know that was an awful lot of information. So I recommend that you start with just one oak species. Get to know one oak species, ideally an oak with some pretty classic characteristics. And first, just try to figure out the section as we did earlier with your acorns. And then see if you can figure out the species. Look at acorns and leaves and galls a lot. And I should have warned you that if you really get into this, you are sure to come down with a serious case of quercophilia. It's a disease that can really affect you a lot. Some of the symptoms are difficulty walking very far, severe episodes of the fidgets when you're indoors, and an abnormally heightened interest in sections. But seriously, please have faith that a time will come when you'll be walking along like the person in this photo, looking for flowers or animal tracks or tarantula burrows, and you will know what oak is over your head without even thinking about it, just by seeing the leaves and acorns on the ground. And if you get to know your oaks, you will have endlessly interesting companions all over California or much of California and over much of the Northern Hemisphere. So have fun and may the oaks be with you. And as a final housekeeping note, for those of you who came in late, on my website, you can purchase oak guides and signed copies of my book and close focus binoculars. You won't see the guides on the home page, but if you go to any other page, you'll find a link to them. You'll also find a link to a page about protecting and restoring butterfly, moth, and bird populations. And if you'd like to be on my email list to receive my nature photo essays or notifications of my events, contact me through my website. And I will be giving this talk again to the East Bay chapter of California Native Plant Society on January 27th at 7:30 p.m. So please spread the word. And I encourage everyone to join California Native Plant Society. If you didn't before, I think you now understand why native plants are so important. And you can look online and find your local chapter. And if you belong to an appropriate organization, please urge that organization to join the California Oaks Coalition. Both organizations do great work. And enjoy the rain tomorrow if it's going to be raining where you live. It's supposed to get here around 4 a.m. And now let's have questions.
So Kate, there was one person that asked how they can get a hold of your laminated oak sheets.
Let's see now, can I see, I want to see people now, so I'm going to change my,
Open up the chat.
let's see. Tell me again, Jen, where I get the, oh, there it is.
You got it.
Got it, okay. How many people are here now?
Let's see, we still have 184. I think some people have left right after you finished talking, but still have quite a few. So if
At one-
anybody has any questions, go ahead and unmute yourself at this point. And Emily, do you see any questions that Kate needs to answer?
Kate,
Yes.
what is your website again? You pitched your website, but I didn't hear.
Oh,
didn't
yeah.
hear.
It's katemarianchild.com, and it's KateMarianchild, all one word.
Yeah, and there's a link in the chat if you want to take a look at it, Chris.
Oh, thanks, Emily.
You have a lot of questions in chat, Kate.
I have a question that is in chat. It's the first one.
Do you want to go ahead and say it?
Yes, I collect oak galls for my daughter who dyes the yarn she spins with natural dyes
Yeah,
and uses the galls as a mordant.
yeah.
Which are the best oak trees from which to collect those galls? They're usually white and about the size of a small apple.
Yeah, so those are all the oaks in the white oak section can have those galls on them. That's the one called the oak apple gall.
Yeah.
And so that's Valley oak, blue oak, Oregon oak, California scrub oak, probably leather oak.
Okay.
And I don't think it matters which of those trees she collects them from. I forgot to mention that interior live oaks have a gall that looks somewhat like those. It's, round and brown or tannish brown, and maybe the size of, well, smaller than a tennis ball. But, and I don't know, those may also, I think the size is important. You wouldn't want to use really tiny little galls to make more.
No, I collect the big ones.
Yeah.
And she,
So I don't think it matters which tree you find them on.
okay, no, she just wants, are high in tannin.
Yes.
So they serve as good mordant when
Yes.
you're dying.
Yeah.
So she lives in Eastern Washington where there are no oak trees.
Oh, so you're collecting them for her. Uh-huh.
So I live down the peninsula in Portola Valley, and she collects them for me.
Oh. Uh-huh.
I used to be involved with the Redwood Valley Outdoor Education Project and was sent the link to this to watch. And I thought, oh, then I can find out about the oak. So it's been extremely helpful. Thank you
good.
so very much.
You're welcome.
Jennifer, I'd be happy to collect some galls for you. I come across them all the time if you want to put your address in the chat, or maybe not because there's a lot of people here, but.
You can
What?
actually send something directly to each other in chat.
Can I ask a question about, is it true that oaks don't make acorns every year? It's just like every 2 years or so, or depending on the species?
Well, they vary in each species, varies. Let's see. Some years a species will seem to skip acorn production or produce just very few. And there are also, maybe your question is also related to this. On some oak species, the acorns take 2 years to mature instead of 1. So all of the red oaks that we have, except for Coast Live Oak, those acorns take 2 years to mature. But all of the white oaks take 1. And I think Canyon Live Oak takes 2. So the reason for is the subject of, it's called masting, the production of nuts. And the question of why a species will have a lot of acorns one year and not very many acorns the next is still a subject of debate. And I don't feel really competent to go into it right now. But yes, it's
Kate,
true. Yeah.
there's a question from John Curran here. He says, we see blue oaks living side by side with live oaks in Monterey County. Any idea why that happens?
Yeah, I see it here too. I think it just depends on the aspect, the orientation of the location, the slope. Blue oaks like fairly arid conditions and fairly poor soil, not very nutrient soil. And coast live oaks seem to be able, or is it coast live oaks or interior live oaks? I forget. What was the question, Jen?
I think live oaks. I scrolled past it.
Okay. Yeah, so that's not uncommon.
Somebody asked, well, let's see, to Kate, which oak is your favorite and why?
Well, I love blue oaks because they are host to at least 41 species of at least 41 species of gall wasps lay eggs on blue oaks. And so I love to go on treasure hunts. But valley oaks also have a whole lot of those really little colorful galls. So I'd say maybe valley oaks. I don't know. I love them all. I didn't used to like the live oaks very much because the leaves are so kind of hard and often bristly. And then as I was writing my book, I learned how many species prefer to nest in or eat the leaves of or lay their eggs on the leaves of live oaks. And so I developed a new appreciation for them. I think
there's another couple of questions coming up, and we have another 15 minutes. So Norma asks, I heard that only a small percentage of oaks produce the preponderance of acorns. Is that true, and why?
I've never heard that. You mean a whole small proportion of all of the oaks we have overall, or a small proportion of, say, blue oaks in any given year? Don't know what the question is asking exactly.
I think what she's getting at, and maybe she's written more or she can speak up, is that some oaks are massively productive and others not so much.
Oh, yeah, well, that's right. Most oaks don't even begin producing acorns until they're 20 or 30 years old. So that's one reason. And then I think I've observed that when they're getting really old and starting to decline, or in serious decline anyway, they don't produce so many. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that, Jen? Or does anyone else here?
I don't. I mean, I think you got at a couple good possibilities. But yeah, don't know the answer to that. But there's another question right after that from Gwen. She asks, is there any push for legislation in California to protect the oaks? If so, who is pushing for it?
Well, that is a huge subject. Unfortunately, there's no statewide push that I know of. It's mostly county by county. There in the California Oaks Coalition, which I mentioned in my closing comments, is doing more on a statewide basis than anyone I know. They pushed together some legislation, or in around the year 2000 for protection of oaks, but it was on a purely voluntary basis of each county, and there were no teeth in it. And there was originally some money, but there's no money now. So the California Native Plant Society would be a great organization to spearhead such an effort, and especially allied with the California Oaks Coalition. So if I would urge, if you belong to an organization, urge that, like a conservation organization, urge it to join the California Oaks Coalition. Do you have any more thoughts on that? Do you want to contribute anything to that answer, Jen?
I think you hit it. I mean, the California Oaks Foundation is a good go-to organization for information. I think there is one rule protecting valley oaks in California. So there are some minor protections, but probably not what we're really looking for.
That are statewide, I mean?
Statewide, yes.
Yeah, heritage oaks get more protection than anything else, and especially heritage valley oaks. But what we want is legislation to protect oak woodlands as a whole, not just individual trees.
Yes. Amy asks the question, what does live oak refer to in the various live oaks?
Oh, it means that they're evergreen. Maybe I left that out. I had it in at one point. So it means that they keep their leaves all year. They're not deciduous.
Okay, let's see. I'm trying to see if there's
I
lots
have
of
a
thank you. I'm
question.
sorry.
Kate, I see a question about, and I have a question that goes along with it about hybridized oaks. I've noticed, I used to live in the mountains of San Diego, and we had gold spotted oak borer decimate the oak forests. But the hybrids were more resilient against infestation. And is that true with sudden oak death as well?
Well, sudden oak death affects coast live oak, tan oak. Those two can't hybridize with each other. It doesn't affect any oaks in the white oak group so far. So I don't think hybridization is even a possibility. Well, if coast live oaks live near interior live oaks, for instance, or shreve oak, they will be probably hybrids, have some amount of DNA from those other oaks. And I don't know the answer to the question if the ones with the other DNA would be more resistant to sudden oak death.
Do you have a recommendation for reforestation in environments that are just full of sudden oak death?
No, I don't really know very much about that. I don't live in a sudden oak death area, so I haven't been immersed in that. The California scrub jays are great reforesters, and on the Channel Islands, they're doing experiments now with encouraging them to reforest by setting up feeding stations for them where they can collect acorns and then go out and plant them. But I would reforest. Well, is your question what oaks to plant? That's a good question.
Well, yeah, that opens the whole other thing. But I noticed where I live in West Marin, we've lost most of our oaks here on this property, this ranch. And yeah, for the biodiversity, I'd love to bring them back if possible.
So do you know how to plant oaks? Is that are you wondering about how to do it?
We have so many bays here that apparently are harbingers of sudden oak. So it's a mixed forest, and maybe that's the challenge. But just wondering if there was any insight anybody had that would give us an advantage.
Well,
there's a nice note from California Native Plant to everyone about how to grow. Just now in the chat.
Oh.
Did you talk about the Oracle oak?
Well, Oracle oak.
Did you talk about the Oracle oak?
Yeah, Oracle oak, I didn't get into the hybrids, but Oracle oak is an unofficial hybrid. It's a cross between a black oak and any one of the other oaks in the red oak section. So it could be a cross with coast live oak or with interior live oak or Shreve oak. So it's not considered an official hybrid because it's not a cross between black oak and any one specific other oak. And so Oracle oaks look kind of like a little bit of black oak and a little bit of live oak. And the interesting thing is the black oaks are deciduous, and all the other ones that it crosses with are evergreen. And so you'll see the leaves sort of fall off in the fall, but not completely. And of course, the leaf shape is a lot like a little bit of one and a little bit of the other.
Would the acorns be viable?
Yes, that's the interesting thing about these hybrids between oak species is that acorns are viable.
And true to seed, would it produce another Oracle oak?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Okay.
It'll just, well, I'm not sure about that. Carrie, you're not here, are you? Do you know, Jen?
Well, I have one on my property. I'll go find an acorn and plant it and see if it does.
Okay.
If the oak has produced an acorn, there's a very good chance that it's a viable acorn.
I haven't heard of any non-viability between oak when there's hybridization, but I guess it's possible. I'll have to look that up.
Can you help me distinguish between interior live oak and Shreve oak?
Well, leaves of Shreve oak are usually quite a bit larger than the leaves of interior live oak. And the petiole, the leaf stem, is longer on Shreve oak. And hold on a minute. This isn't one of my strengths. The leaves of Shreve oak are usually cupped and they're dull on the underside, not shiny.
Mm-hmm.
And there's one other thing that I can't remember right now. If you send me a question through my website, I'll try to get you the answer to that other, I'll try to tell you that other characteristic.
Thank you.
Hi, I have a question. The oak flowers are male and female, is that correct?
Yes.
So when they hybridize, are they in situations where they be females from one species and males from another? The most common hybrids between the species that do hybridize, or is there a way to determine that?
Well, the individual trees aren't female or male. The female and male flowers occur on the same tree.
Right, but if they hybridize, basically form an acorn, then that acorn grows, and you have now you have a hybrid tree. Is there a way to determine what if the source came from? I guess you always look to see, well, what were the species, but then can you also tell where if is it prevalent that the female flowers from one species are more likely to hybridize with the male flowers of another, rather than vice versa? Do you know what I mean? Maybe it's too complicated to ask.
That could be a PhD dissertation.
Yeah, I've never heard any discussion of that question.
I mean, oftentimes you'll find that the males and females are slightly differently timed on the same plant,
Right.
or placed differently up and down on the plant so that they don't self-pollinate, but whether that makes them more inclined to be pollinated by different species, that's another question.
It's kind of like, how a mule always comes from a male donkey and a female horse, right? And if
Oh,
you,
I didn't know that.
yeah. And if you have a female donkey and a male horse, I forgot what that's called, but it's called something different. So anyway, I just wondered if there's something, but as Vivian suggests, it might be a PhD dissertation, but I think it'd be interesting.
That's Jen. Yeah.
Jen, sorry.
Yeah, I've never heard anything about that, any discussion. But what Jen said, I have heard that the male and female flowers on the same tree don't mature at the same time to avoid self-pollination.
So I threw a couple of websites up in the chat, and I can leave this up for a little bit. If people want to grab those websites, you can also just copy and paste them. But let me look for and see if there's any more questions. There's something from Linda. Is the relationship between the wasps and the oak symbiotic or parasitic? Or
Yeah, that's a good question. Nobody knows for sure if the oaks benefit at all from galls. There's one very sketchy hypothesis out there that maybe almost all galls are really high in tannin, and that maybe it's a place where the tree can dump excess tannin. But that's the only possible benefit to the tree that anyone I know has ever thought of. And some trees, some valley oaks particularly, that are just covered with oak apple galls do look like they're pretty stressed. So, and the galls definitely use the tree's resources. So it may be parasitic, mostly parasitic.
let's see, there's a few more questions and we have a few more, just a couple more minutes. Kate, do you want to look and pick one out, or should I pick another question out?
I haven't been able to find the chats.
Okay. Does anybody want to? Okay.
Yeah, I have one question from, it looks like Kathy Rose sent me a question instead of to the group. Kathy is there I can see Kathy Rose, and her question is, interior live oak is shrubby in Southern California. At what point in the north does it become a tree?
I don't know.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
A great website to look at is iNaturalist. And if you're not on iNaturalist, I would totally recommend going on there. It's a citizen science project where you can look at other people's observations around the world. But if you're curious about, let's see, Quercus agrifolia, you can see people's pictures all the way up and down the state by just going to their observations and clicking on them. So that might be a nice way to answer that question.
Oh yeah, and another site for that is CalPhotos.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see where photos were taken and the date they were taken. I use that a lot if something flowers, for instance.
And calflora.org is also a wonderful way to check out other observations from around the state. CalFlora does a great job of giving you distributions of plants too throughout California. I think there were a couple questions about distribution in the chat, and that might be a great place to go. You go to calflora.org, type in your species, and you get a really nice map of where it's found.
I'm having a hard time hearing you, Jen. You got quieter.
Uh-oh. Okay. Well, I think actually, I was just saying that CalFlora is a great way to find distributions of plants.
Oh, yeah. And CalScape, yeah. And Jepson eFlora also.
So it's 8:30 now. Does Kate, do you want to wrap up?
Well, I think I kind of already did. Just if you live where it's going to be raining tomorrow, enjoy the rain, and thank you for coming. And feel free to email me questions, or yeah, go to my website for any reason. And I'd like to know how many people came. Do we have a